Welcome back. In this short video lesson, we'll be discussing how to calculate inflation rate using the consumer price index. And by the end of this video, you should be able to understand the importance and the reason for calculating the CPI and be able to actually calculate inflation rate using the consumer price index. So in the previous video, we calculated inflation rate using the GDP deflator method. The problem with this method was that this inflation rate was telling you an increase or decrease in price levels of everything that is produced in the economy. Now, there are many things in the economy that are produced and might not be relevant for a typical consumer of the country. Therefore, we need to come up with a measure that tells us whether the things that a typical consumer uses have become more expensive or not over time. And for that, we use the consumer price index. In the consumer price index, we come up with a bundle of items that a typical Pakistani uses. And then we try to figure out whether the prices of items in this particular bundle have increased over time or not. And this increase or decrease would give us the inflation or deflation rates. So these are the two indicators of general price levels, the GDP deflator and the consumer price index. They're both used and plotted on a graph. They're basically showing you similar trends. However, if you notice, the values of the consumer price index are generally a little higher than the deflator values. So, if the value of the CPI goes up, this means that a typical family will have to spend more dollars to maintain the same living standard. The process to calculate CPI is a 5-step process, and CPI is generally, at least in the case of Pakistan, is calculated by the Bureau of Statistics and is a measure that's calculated monthly. The first step of calculating CPI is coming up with a list of items that a typical Pakistani would be using. The Statistics Bureau carries out surveys and finds out different things that typical consumers use and comes up with a list of things. You can see these things in the table, and then ranks them based on the amount of money people are spending on each of them. This way, they come up with a basket of items that a typical consumer or citizen of Pakistan uses. Once they've come up with this list of items that a typical consumer uses, they fix this basket. Next, they want to figure out how the price of this particular basket changes over time. And by doing that, they come up with the inflation rates. So once they have decided the basket, what the Statistics Bureau does is they carry out surveys. They go to the markets, 40 different cities of Pakistan and different markets, and come up with prices of these items from the basket. So the first step was coming up with a list of items that a typical consumer uses. The second step was going to the market, find out the prices of these items. Once they have the prices of these items, the third step is using the prices to calculate the cost of the basket. If you were to buy the basket, how much would it cost? So using the price, you multiply the price by the items and you come up with the cost of the complete basket. The fourth step is to use the cost of the basket and come up with the consumer price index. And finally, using the consumer price index, you calculate the inflation rate. Now we'll use an example to understand the 5 steps in more detail. In this particular example, we are assuming that a typical Pakistani, say, consumes 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers in a month, or let's say in a year. So, a typical Pakistani consumes 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. This is the basket that a typical consumer uses, and we want to figure out how the price of this particular basket changes over time and whether it's going to cost me more to buy this basket later or not. If that does happen, this would mean that things have gotten expensive. So, the first step that the Statistics Bureau does is it comes up with a typical basket that the consumers are using. In this case, we're assuming that a typical Pakistani consumes 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers, and this is the basket. So once we have the basket, we fix the basket, we've decided that this is what is these are the items that a typical Pakistani uses, and we want to figure out whether the prices of these items from the basket change or not over time. We go and find out the price of hot dogs and hamburgers, the items of the basket, over time. We find that in 2001, hot dogs were for $1, hamburgers $2. Similarly, in 2003, hot dogs were for $3, hamburgers for $4. Now that you have the prices down, we want to figure out that if somebody was to buy this basket which had 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers, how much would it cost him? If someone was to buy the basket in 2001, a basket that contained 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers, it would cost him 1 multiplied by 4, which would mean $8. Similarly, if he was to buy the same basket again in 2002, it would cost him the price of the hot dog that year multiplied by the number of hot dogs plus the price of the hamburger that year multiplied by the number of hamburgers, so $14. In 2003, hot dogs have become more expensive. They've become they're selling at $3 now, and 3 into 4 would give you the cost of buying the $4 4 hot dogs, and 4 into 2 would give you the cost of buying the 2 hamburgers. And ultimately, that year to buy the same basket, you'd have to spend $20. So, till this point, this is what we've done. We've come up with a typical set of items that a typical consumer uses, and we've called it a basket, and we've fixed the basket. And this basket contained 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. The second step was finding the prices of these hot dogs and hamburgers over time, and using survey, the prices of the hot dogs and hamburgers were calculated. The third step is to find the cost of the basket in each year. If you were to buy the basket in uh, the same basket in all the 3 years, how much would the basket cost every year? And in the first year in 2001, it would have cost $8. In 2002, it would have cost $14, and in 2003, $20. Once you have these values, the fourth step is to calculate the consumer price index. The consumer price index is calculated by dividing the cost of the basket by the cost of the basket from the base year. Recall, the base year was the reference year that was used, and in the previous video we discussed that the Pakistan Statistics Bureau these days is using uh, year 2015-2016 as the base year. So the formula for calculating CPI is divide the cost of the basket by the cost of the basket from the base year. In this example, we've chosen 2001 as the base year, as the reference year. The formula for calculating CPI is for every year you divide the cost of the basket for that year by the cost of the basket from the base year. So the cost of the basket of the base year is $8. So 8 divided by 8 into 100 would give you the CPI for 2001. In 2014, the cost of the basket is $14. So you divide $14 by the cost of the basket of the base year, which was $8, and 14 divided by 8 into 100 would give you the CPI of 2002. Similarly, for 2003, you divide the cost of the basket in 2003 by the cost of the basket of the base year, which was $8. So 20 divided by 8 into 100 should give you the CPI of 2003. Now that you have the three CPIs, you can think of them as the GDP deflator. And if you recall, in the deflator method, we said that the growth rate of the deflator gave us the inflation rate. Similarly, in the consumer price index method, the growth rate of the consumer price index gives you the inflation rate. And the formula was y2 minus y1 over y1 into 100. So current year minus the previous year divided by the previous year into 100. So the current year 250 minus the previous year 175 divided by the previous year 175 into 100. This means that thing became 43% more expensive from 2002 to 2003. From 2001 to 2002, things became 75% more expensive. So this is how you calculate inflation rate using CPI. I'm leaving you with a practice question. I'd like you to give it a shot and see if you're able to solve this.